Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today, I start a 5-part series on the Oscars and compliance with my good friend Jay Rosen. Jay is a reformed screenwriter and has worked in Hollywood, so we're going to use some of his insights to talk about the Oscars, the process for nomination, some of the things that are used in the campaigns for winning Oscars, and how some of those topics relate to compliance. This episode comes in at just under 26 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I have with me my good friend Jay Rosen. I asked Jay if, in honor of the Oscar nominations, the upcoming Oscar ceremonies, and 30 Days of Oscar on TMC, if he would join me for a series of podcasts around the Oscars and compliance. And he's graciously agreed to do so. This will be our first of probably 5 podcasts, and today we're going to focus on the process by which films are nominated for the Oscars and then the voting process. And also we're going to look at some of the factors that may go into influencing the voting of the members of the Academy the members that will vote for the Oscar nominations. So with that brief introduction, Jay, welcome, and I really appreciate you taking the time to go on this podcast series with me.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me, and it's always fun to get back in touch with my Hollywood roots. So to kind of start the whole thing is we are now out in Los Angeles in the middle of award seasons, and we had the Golden Globes a couple weeks ago. Sometimes people see that as a precursor to what's going to happen in the Oscars. And in between the Golden Globes and the Oscars, you have all sorts of different organizations that, basically you kind of campaign to get your film nominated. So whether it's the National Board of Review or it's, these film critics for there, and then you have the individual guilds as well. So what's happening is these films are being screened in the audience. They're being screened to different guilds. You can see them at commercial theaters, and then they're also sending out screeners, which now, since we're all high-tech, are DVDs. They used to be VHS many years ago. And what happens is when you put that screener in your DVR, it tells you by clicking the button and agreeing to use this DVD that you're agreeing that you will not loan it, you will not share it, and when you're done with it, you're going to dispose of that DVD. So that's kind of like the mechanism that's happening right now here in Hollywood.
Okay, let me stop you there, Jay, because you were a screenwriter in a prior incarnation of Jay Rosen, and there are other disciplines within the movie-making industry. Could you explain a little bit about that to the audience?
Sure. So a lot of times there are technical awards that are given. So, in addition to Best Actor, Best Actress, Supporting Actor, Supporting Actress in film, there are certain technical awards that are given out for cinematography, for sound effect editing, for special effects, for music, for costumes, for set design. So this is something that, the industry really takes seriously. A lot of times you can win an Academy Award, and it may not be for the film that you are currently working on, but sometimes they may be awarding you for a career. So while there are lots of people who have been nominated many times, sometimes you're going to win an award and you'll be in your 60s and the 70s, and you should have gotten that award back when you were just coming up and you were 28 or 29. And, to kind of draw a sports parallel, you never know when you're going to get back to the Super Bowl. So it's, really special for some of these athletes when they're towards the end of their career. John Elway, don't even want to say this, but even our blue guy, Tom Brady, right now, he is 37 years old, and he's luckily playing in his 6th Super Bowl, but in his early 20s, he went to 3 in a period of 4 years. So sorry to get off track on football, but I see some similarities, between winning a national championship, and this is basically winning the movie national championship. And a lot of times it may add more box office revenue to the films. Unfortunately, most of these films either have played out earlier in the year, or they do something which is a qualifying run for 1 week. The week between Christmas and New Year's is a busy week in Los Angeles and New York. They take out films for a week so they can be nominated for, the different awards, and then a national release might be timed later or staggered, similar with the movie American Sniper. So that's kind of an overview of the different technical awards.
Well, we're recording this via phone, so our podcast listeners cannot see that you're wearing your New England Patriots cap, and we're recording this the day after the Patriots soundly whipped the Indianapolis Colts in one of the great beatdowns of AFC Conference Championships in recent memory. So my fear is that the Patriots may have fired all of their mojo shots yesterday, but nevertheless, they're in Super Bowl 49. Brady's in his sixth, and I'm going to have to go with my main man in Michigan, alum Brady, and hopefully they'll be able to overcome the Seahawks. But my co-fear is that the Seahawks played about as badly as a team could play for 58 minutes and still managed to beat Green Bay. So it's going to be a great Super Bowl, at least I hope so. So congrats to your Patriots. And let's see if Brady can pull one more out.
That would be wonderful.
So could we maybe focus on the screenwriters, of which you were one at one point? Are you? So do I understand correctly that the Screenwriters Guild would make the nominations for Best Screenplay?
Correct. So the writers are sent basically a questionnaire, or when I used to be in the Guild, it was a questionnaire. It's probably some type of email instrument now. And basically they will list all the movies that came out in the last calendar year, and then you have an opportunity to vote for, I don't know, either your top 3 or your top 5. And there are 2 different categories. So you have original screenplay and you have adapted. And adapted means that it's, based on other source material. So if you look at American Sniper, the writer who's nominated for it is Jason Hall, but it's really based on, the protagonist's autobiography and whoever wrote it with him. So there's usually, these 2 different categories, and, original screenplay is different. We've got Birdman, the Michael Keaton movie. You've got Boyhood, Richard Linklater's movie that's shot over a period of several years. Foxcatcher, The Grand Budapest Hotel by Wes Anderson, and then Nightcrawler. So, the Guild will vote for both of those. The other things that's going to happen is that you've got the members of the Writers Guild voting for screenplays, and they will also vote for television shows, and those awards are usually given at the end of the year in September at the Emmys. But what's interesting about the Golden Globes is it's really the only event that brings together both the television and the film world.
Jay, if we could turn now from the nominating process to the process that is occurring now that the films have been nominated. And sitting in Houston, Texas, admittedly in the provinces, nevertheless, even here we see what I would characterize it, if not a political campaign, an ad campaign from studios to influence members who may vote. Can you explain that process?
Sure. One of the companies that really excels at this is a company called the Weinstein Company, and prior to that, they were the owners of a company called Miramax. And there was a year, maybe a period where 5 or 6 out of the 10 Best Picture nominees were released by Miramax. And, sometimes when you hear about independent films and you hear about the Sundance Film Festival and all these other film festivals, a company like Weinstein are very good at spotting these films when they're playing in independent competition. then they buy the film, they release it, and, you know, not only is it about the release, but to your point earlier, Tom, it's about how do you run this campaign, and there's going to be an angle on doing something. So, you know, a movie like The King's Speech, there was a way that you would slowly kind of build up momentum, and, you know, maybe you would appeal to members of the guild here in the U.S. who are either former residents of the UK or they're Anglophiles. You might also run that campaign with BAFTA, which is the British Film Association. They basically have very prestigious awards. A BAFTA award is just as big as winning an Oscar. So by playing off these different film festivals, by getting different reviews from the Boston critics, the LA critics, the different film guilds, this all builds up. And what happens, what's very interesting to the people who are up for these nominations, you've got kind of like award seasons. And, it starts off with the big party at the Golden Globes where everybody sits together and the alcohol is freely flowing to keep everybody happy, and it ends at the Oscars. And along the way, these actors and actresses and craftspeople get to really know each other. They go to all these different guild awards, and it's award season. So it's kind of fun here. And I think, as I said earlier, if you get recognized in your career, it's really nice to get to meet other people from the other disciplines of movie making and get to go on the award circuit.
Well, Jay, the thing that intrigued me about this, and the reason I asked you to really go into some detail explaining the process by which a film is nominated and then the process by which votes or the campaign, rather, that film studios will engage in is, you and I have had long discussions about the use of language as part of the process of compliance. And myself and Meryl Brink have recently released a white paper on local language solutions as a preventative tool in anti-corruption compliance. And really it was listening to you and your thinking about really out of the box thinking about the use of language in a compliance program, not simply picking up the phone and calling a language service provider when you're under investigation. That really got me thinking about this process. Could you give us a few words on that?
Sure. Great question, Tom. One of the things that we were thinking of when we work with our clients is, exactly that point that you made, that you don't want to start spending all the money on translations, after the proverbial cow has left the barn. So we started to think, what can we do from a proactive perspective, and, to borrow your framework about detect and prevent, how can we do this? And one of the things we thought is that, most of these companies that run into trouble have a global footprint. And for the longest time, English has been assumed as the global business language. And, you have numbers on a spreadsheet, and they don't usually lie, but the subtextual information that goes around that, qualitative things that we need to talk about and we need to share on a global audience, unfortunately, that information is not conveyed in English. And, by trying to look at this from a holistic perspective about how does language influence every day of your business activity, not only when, God forbid, there's litigation, but how can you leverage language to actually, give yourselves a competitive advantage in conducting business on a global basis.
I really like that phrase, leverage language, to give yourself a competitive advantage going forward. If I could maybe flip back to our discussion of the Oscars, one of the things, Jay, that has always intrigued me is that it appears the Academy members will vote for films that are more artsy, some perhaps less commercial. We've certainly had some notable exceptions to that, Peter Jackson
and the trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, won a considerable number of Oscars. They were the highest-grossing films for a number of years. But I was wondering kind of what your thoughts might be on how much money films make versus does that play into the consideration of Academy members voting?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and one of the things I did to prep this call is just for giggles, I went to a website which is called boxofficemojo.com, and the top 10 films from last year, which all grossed over $200 million, and that's just domestic U.S. gross. It's not taking into account the international gross. But 1 through 10 is Guardians of the Galaxy, Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1, Captain America the Winter Soldier, a favorite of the Rosen girls, the Lego Movie, Transformers, Age of Extinction, The Hobbit, the final version, Battle of the Five Armies, Maleficent, which we love too because it's about princesses, X-Men, Days of Future Past, Big Hero 6, Disney checking in again, and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. So if you look at that list, the majority of them are action movies or fairy tales. It's something that goes well to foreign countries. It's action. There's not a lot of dialogue that you're going to get hung up on. And unfortunately, these are not the films that the Academy deems to give their awards to. And the way I would kind of liken it is in the past there used to be a real kind of snobbery between, you're in the major leagues if you make motion pictures, but you're in the minors if you make TV. And I think a lot of people really now prefer to work in television because you can get more immediate results. There is no longer that stigma. Actors, writers, and directors can freely move between TV and film, and you've got the rise of channels like, HBO and Showtime and, even AMC, which is, given Mad Men a platform. So what I thought is interesting is the movies that the Academy, chooses to recognize, with the exception of some of these big movies that they might win special effects or sound effects editing. But if we look at these pictures that were nominated for Best Film by the Academy, it's going to be tell a different story. American Sniper, Birdman, Boyhood, Grand Budapest Hotel, Imitation Game, Selma, The Theory of Everything, and Whiplash. And this list of movies are more thoughtful. They may be about political things. They may be about different mores in society. And one of the things that I think I'd like to throw out there is that, unfortunately, the Oscars are being made for a very small universe of thoughtful, artistic movies. And I'm wondering, maybe Hollywood is losing sight of these big money-making machines, that they're just kind of out there to rake in grosses, but they themselves kind of disdain them because they don't have anything important to say. And I'm wondering how that works from an ethics and compliance point of view, and whether or not the correct resources are being targeted at the right audience who needs the helpful hints and the messaging to help them do the right thing.
Well, along the lines of that, certainly film studios and film companies are in business to make profits. And so I don't begrudge companies from maximizing their profit to putting out a product that allows them to do so in a way that the consumers seem to enjoy. And certainly Guardians of the Galaxy would fall into that category, if not for the soundtrack alone. But the message movie, if I can use that phrase, is traditionally had been something that was produced a little bit more often than we see today. And I would either share your concern or have the concern along the lines that we're not getting as many of the smaller pictures that are, if not message movies, are creative because they have to be creative because they don't have big budgets to spend. And I wonder, are any thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I think one thing that, although there is a disappearance of those movies, and, from my days being a bean counter at the studios, $40 million used to be a lot of money to be spent on a movie, maybe in the early 90s, and $40 million is probably the type of money that you would see spent on an art movie now. You could probably, for what really gets spent on an art movie, make somewhere between 20 and 40 art movies for that $40 million. But the majority of the top 10, they probably have spent somewhere between $90 to $200 million on all these movies, especially these large-scale action movies. So one of the things that's interesting now, and this has been happening probably for the last 15 or 20 years, is that if you're Robert Rodriguez, nothing's going to stop you from going out and getting a Digicam and shooting a movie and editing it on your computer. And there has been some great films that have been released over the last few years that are kind of done on a shoestring. So with technology, there is a democratization, or there is democracy now, and you don't need $100 million to make a movie. You can make it on a shoestring, and I think if you can be viral about it, and other things we should think about are, outlets like Hulu and Netflix and YouTube channels. So there are ways to get those art movies or those message movies out, and it might not even be so much about, getting them, getting paid for them, but it's about people getting their point of view out. And one last little piece, and then I'll throw it back to you, is a long time ago the studios used to really have creative power over what they were doing. And if you were the Warner Brothers and you were Ronald Reagan, you'd work on a picture for 6 weeks, and the next 6 weeks when you were done, you would get right on another picture. So if you were an actor, you could shoot 7 to 8 movies a year. We're lucky now if some actors make 2 or 3 movies in a 5-year period. So that creative control is not there anymore, and they're not making message movies anymore. So the studios nowadays have just become a bank. And when the price of production starts to go down to zero and you don't need stars anymore because, hey, if you want to be like the guy who did I'm drawing a blank here. If you want to be like Wes Anderson, you don't need stars. Just get your buddy Luke and Owen Wilson, and you can make your own stars. So I think that's something that gives me hope that with new media and new outlets, there will still be ways for passionate filmmakers with new voices to get their ideas distributed and out to the world.
Jay, let me juxtapose this just a minute, because and put you in the position of the creator, whether that be the screenwriter, the director, the actor. But let me speak from the perspective of the consumer. And what I find most interesting about 2015 is the platforms that are available to me as a consumer to find these art movies, these art films, these message movies, these movies by first, second, third-time filmmakers, these things that are just different. I can obviously go to a Hulu, I can go to a YouTube, but I can go to a Netflix. I can go to a variety of sources. I can go to I guess it used to be called direct DVD, but it's now direct to something. But if I search and I put the time in to look, I'm able to consume a much broader amount of product than just the big budget action pictures. And what I find equally interesting to what you described as the mechanisms available to the creative talent is what's available to me as the consuming public.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really been happening over the past couple of years is just the ability of the Netflix and Hulu and Amazon. And I remember when the Golden Globes happened a couple of weeks ago, my sister in Boston, who was a little bit less technically savvy, sent an email out to our family group and said, well, if I want to watch this transparent show, how do I get it? And then my cousin had to take her through the steps about that it was only available on a certain service, so she couldn't get it on Netflix, so she couldn't get it on Hulu. So, it's about finding these different avenues. And then I think the other thing that's, interesting is there are certain people who are theater people, that it's fun to go sit in an opening, in a packed theater on opening night and watch the movie with other people and get their reaction. And then there's a whole other group of people who are parents like Rebecca and I that if we're going to go to a movie, it's going to be a real financial commitment to have a babysitter come and do all that. So there's two different audiences, and people are consuming movies in so many different ways now that they're watching them on airplanes and on laptops, and where you have public transportation, people are probably streaming and watching them on their cell phones and tablets. So, there's going to be this kind of break that there will be certain movies that demand to be seen as a collective experience, and there are some movies that are just as powerful watching them on your own. And I think that's a litmus test that Rebecca and I tend to ask each other and saying, yeah, we want to go see Guardians of the Galaxy on a big screen because it's going to be fun and it's going to be big and noisy and loud, but some other film might be just as powerful for us on the small screen here at our house.
Well, Jay, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time for our first episode of the 30 Days of Oscar with Jay Rosen, but I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us. Upcoming podcast, for those interested, we're going to look at some of the specific films and actors and actresses that have been nominated and see what compliance lessons we may be able to draw from those. So thanks very much, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom. Take care.